Some stories are too dark to stay buried. Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where forgotten truths whisper through time, and the dead still have something to say. Today, we're unraveling a mystery hidden for more than 30 years. A conspiracy be so powerful it reached into America's highest offices, and the shocking sacrifice of a woman who dared to fight it. This isn't just history. Betrayal, blood, and justice clawed from the shadows. So, before we step into this chilling tale, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video with anyone who loves stories that blur the line between fact and fear. You won't want to miss what happens next. It was the kind of morning that seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. Pittsburgh, December 1887. Steel titan Cornelius Vandermark, a man used to bending the city to his will, walked down the marble stairs of his Fifth Avenue mansion, expecting another day of power and profit. But what he found on the Persian rug stopped him cold. His wife's emerald evening gown, spread out perfectly, still warm like she'd just slipped out of it moments before. But Evangeline Vandermark herself, gone dop. No broken windows, no open doors, no sound in the night. Every servant swore nothing unusual had happened. She'd gone to bed in that very dress just 4 hours earlier. 3 staff members had seen her dot, and then nothing. The police, under pressure from Cornelius's political friends, closed the case in less than a week. No evidence of foul play, they said. But the truth, oh, it was anything but simple. Evangeline's disappearance wasn't random. It was the final chapter in a story that had been quietly unfolding for more than 2 years. A deadly game between a brilliant woman seeking justice for her murdered father and a husband whose fortune had been built on blood, betrayal, and buried secrets. And that night, the game ended. Before we dive deeper into this chilling tale, take a second to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories traveled out now. Let's rewind. Pittsburgh, winter of 1887. A city on fire with industry. Steel and coal made kings out of men, and the skyline was a forest of smokestacks painting the air gray. Money and misery lived side by side here. Palaces rose just blocks away from rat-infested tenements. In this city, a man could climb from rags to riches, fall to an unmarked grave overnight, and towering above it all stood the Vandermark Mansion, a Gothic masterpiece that ruled an entire city block on Fifth Avenue. Towers, turrets, gargoyles carved in France, stained glass windows celebrating the triumph of industry, and a ballroom big enough for 300 of Pittsburgh's elite to dance the night away. 4 acres of manicured gardens, a greenhouse, a carriage house big enough for 12 carriages, servants' quarters for a small army, even an ice house that, as you'll soon see, would become a key part of this dark story. Cornelius Vandermark didn't inherit wealth, he built it. He'd started in the mills, sweating over blazing furnaces, his hands scarred and burned. But he had a mind for steel, a genius for engineering. His innovations made him rich beyond imagination, and somewhere along the way, the idealist died. What replaced him was cold, calculating, and ruthless. Rivals didn't just lose business, they disappeared. A fire here, an accidental boiler explosion there, a key engineer who suddenly never came home. In an age when government oversight was a joke, this was how empires stayed safe, and how enemies stayed silent. Then came Evangeline Hartwell. Boston aristocracy, 20 years younger, copper hair, a laugh like music in a ballroom, a mind sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She was cultured, educated, fluent in multiple languages, and at 25, the social jewel every family wanted their son to marry. For Cornelius, the wedding wasn't about love, it was strategy. Her family's banking power opened doors, loans, expansions, acquisitions, legitimacy. His empire grew bigger, faster, stronger. For Evangeline, it was different. She believed she'd married a visionary, a man who'd improved the lives of the workers sweating in the mills. Not exploit them, but the truth has a way of bleeding through, no matter how carefully it's hidden. By 1887, whispers were everywhere. The couple, once the glittering heart of Pittsburgh society, now seemed distant. Evangeline had grown quiet, withdrawn. Something was wrong behind those heavy mansion doors, something no one dared to speak of out loud. And then, one December morning, a dress lay on a rug, still warm, and a woman was gone. What happened next would unravel the lives of some of the most powerful people in the city. Stick with us to the end. This story only gets darker. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the incredible, hidden chapters of America's past we uncover here. She started spending hours in the mansion's vast library alone. Picture it, a towering room, shelves from floor to ceiling, packed with more than 3,000 books, rare first editions, scientific volumes, and an ever-growing collection of works on America's industrial rise. And there, at a massive oak desk, Evangeline Vandermark filled page after page of a leather-bound journal, locked away with a tiny brass key she kept on a chain around her neck. But that wasn't all that changed. The staff, 12 carefully chosen, fiercely loyal servants, began to notice her slipping away at strange hours. Long walks, muddy boots, a faraway look in those sharp green eyes. Where was she going? Through Pittsburgh's rougher neighborhoods, speaking quietly with mill workers' wives, listening to the children of men broken by factory accidents. To anyone else, it looked like curiosity or charity. But Evangeline was doing something far more dangerous, quietly tracing a deadly pattern of accidents that seemed to follow wherever her husband's empire spread. And the truth she uncovered was going to get her killed. The Vandermark estate ran like clockwork. Every person had a place. Every door, every window accounted for. Margaret Sullivan, the Irish head housekeeper, had been there nearly 10 years. Tough, principled, brilliant at keeping order. The kind of woman who saw everything, even when she said nothing. Thomas Brennan, the Scottish groundskeeper, knew every inch of the property. His hands tended the manicured gardens, but his sharp eyes picked up details no one else noticed, details that later would shake the case wide open. Charles Henley, the butler, heard things other people didn't. He was in the room for every dinner, every party, every whispered fight that wasn't meant for servants' ears. A man trained never to react, but one whose silence would later crack under the weight of what he'd witnessed. And then there was Dr. Franklin Westbrook, the family physician, educated at Harvard, respected across Pittsburgh, and deeply troubled by what he saw happening to Evangeline. His private notes, uncovered long after, hinted at marital difficulties that were tearing her health and her sanity to pieces. This house wasn't just wealthy, it was airtight. Nothing came in or out without someone knowing. No visitor went unaccounted for. No door opened by accident, which is what made what happened next feel almost supernatural. Because in a mansion that controlled every minute, Evangeline simply vanished. Outside, Pittsburgh itself was simmering. The Haymarket riot in Chicago had already rattled the country. Workers were organizing, angry and desperate for justice. Violence between industrial barons and laborers felt inevitable, and in that tense winter air came whispers, quiet, dangerous whispers, about a secret alliance of the nation's richest men, industrialists who would protect their power by any means necessary, including murder. December 12, 1887. At first, it was just another night at the Vandermark mansion. Routine, perfectly timed, at 7 o'clock sharp. As always, dinner was served in the ornate Victorian dining room, a place of ridiculous luxury, a polished mahogany table for 24 guests, a chandelier from Bohemia sparkling overhead, oil paintings glorifying industry on every wall. That night's menu: roasted pheasant, winter vegetables from the greenhouse, and a bottle of 1878 Chateau Margaux, a single bottle worth more than a steelworker made in a month. But Margaret noticed something she couldn't shake. Evangeline barely touched her meal. She nodded at her husband's chatter, murmured polite replies, but her eyes kept drifting, not across the table, to the windows, as if she was waiting for someone or bracing for something. Margaret would later tell Detective Samuel Crawford that Evangeline had the look of a woman memorizing the room, like she somehow knew it might be the last time she'd ever see it. Cornelius, on the other hand, was in rare form, laughing, boasting about a massive new steel contract with the Pennsylvania Railroad, talking about expansion into Ohio and West Virginia, like nothing in the world could touch him. But something was already moving against them. That night, something dark, and what happened after that dinner would change Pittsburgh's elite forever. Before we go further into this chilling case, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who loves history's darkest corners, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the stories they don't teach you in school. What happened next, you won't see coming. Charles Henley, the butler, moved like a ghost through the dining room, silent, precise as always. But even he couldn't ignore it. Cornelius kept checking his pocket watch, over and over, not casually, nervously, like a man waiting for something he knew was coming, something on a schedule. By 9:30, dinner was long done, and Margaret Sullivan helped Evangeline prepare for the night. But instead of the soft nightgown she usually wore, Evangeline chose something else entirely. That stunning emerald silk gown, the one meant for parties, not sleep. Imported from Paris, nearly $500. A small fortune in silk and beadwork that shimmered under the gaslight like water catching fire. Margaret remembered complimenting it, and Evangeline smiled, the first true smile she'd seen from her in weeks. But then came something unexpected. Evangeline hugged her tight, and whispered, "Thank you for your kindness, Margaret. You've been like a mother to me." At the time, it felt touching, sweet, but later, Margaret realized, it sounded like goodbye. She looked almost relieved. Margaret would tell the police later. Like a great weight had been lifted, but also like she'd lost everything she loved. There was one more detail that stuck. That night, Evangeline wore a piece of jewelry Margaret had never seen, a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. When asked about it, Evangeline simply said, "It holds something precious, something that must be kept safe." She wouldn't open it, wouldn't explain the intricate Celtic design, hinted at Irish craftsmanship, a curious choice among her usual subtle, expensive jewelry. Later that night, around 11 o'clock, Thomas Brennan made his rounds. Through the frost-covered glass of Evangeline's private study, he saw her, seated at her desk, writing, not calmly, like usual, frantic, urgent. Her posture told him more than her pen ever could. Desperation, what he couldn't see from outside. Was the storm unfolding inside that room? The study was her refuge, a space filled with keepsakes from boson shelves of her beloved books, personal papers, and hidden in plain sight, evidence. That night, Evangeline was writing her last entry, a final record, everything she had uncovered. Names, dates, crimes. A confession of the powerful men who'd killed to build their empires. And the secret network known quietly among insiders as the Pittsburgh Circle. Behind certain books, photographs, letters, maps dotted with red pins, each one marking a suspicious accident, each with notes on who died, how, and who profited. A silent archive of murder built piece by piece over months, and then silence. When morning came, Margaret unlocked the mansion from within. As always, the front door's heavy bolt was still locked from the inside. Every ground floor window checked, sealed tight. No tampering. Stairs. Windows were too high to reach without a ladder, and every ladder in the carriage house was still in place. Snow-dusted, untouched, the snow told its own story. A perfect, unbroken blanket. No prints, no tracks, nothing. If someone left the mansion that night, they'd done it without touching the ground, and then the foyer. That's where Margaret froze. On the Persian rug, laid out carefully, almost like a ritual, lay Evangeline's emerald gown, still warm. The faint, familiar trace of lavender perfume lingered like a ghost. In the cold morning air, the gown hadn't been ripped off. It was arranged perfect, deliberate, not a bead out of place. Beside it, a single torn journal page. 4 words, in Evangeline's hand: the truth must survive. But the details got worse. The rug beneath the gown was slightly discolored, like it had been scrubbed, treated with some kind of chemical dot, and the air. Margaret and Thomas both noticed it. A faint, medicinal smell, like the kind hospitals use to put patients under dot. And finally, the jewelry. Evangeline's massive diamond and beryl wedding ring, worth more than most homes in Pittsburgh, lay on the cold marble beside the gown, untouched, unclaimed. Whatever happened in that house wasn't robbery. It was something far darker. If you're still with me, we're just getting to the heart of this mystery, because what happens after this will leave you stunned. Imagine this: the one thing that could have explained everything gone. The delicate silver locket Margaret saw around Evangeline's neck the night before had vanished. Whoever took her gown left priceless jewelry behind, but they made sure that locket disappeared. Why? When Cornelius Vandermark was woken and brought downstairs, the staff expected panic. They expected a husband tearing through the house, demanding answers. But that's not what happened. He just stood there, in the foyer, staring at his wife's gown, like it was a ghost laid out before him. Margaret would later say he didn't look shocked at all. He looked terrified, like a man who'd been waiting for a nightmare to finally arrive. And instead of calling the police or ordering a search of the estate, Cornelius gave 2 very strange commands. First, he told Charles Henley to fetch his private secretary, Arthur Peaton, a jittery little man who handled Cornelius's most sensitive business dealings. Then he ordered Margaret to collect every single one of Evangeline's personal journals and papers, supposedly to look for clues. But to the staff watching, it looked a lot more like he was locking down evidence, not searching for his missing wife. An hour later, Dr. Franklin Westbrook arrived, but Cornelius didn't bring him to the scene, didn't ask for medical expertise. Instead, he took the doctor straight into his private office. They stayed there for half an hour. When Westbrook finally came out, his face was pale, his mouth tight. He didn't speak to anyone, not a word. Meanwhile, outside, Thomas Brennan was circling the property, and that's when he found something no one wanted to see. Near the old ice house, half buried under a thin coat of fresh snow, were dark stains. Stains that looked an awful lot like blood when Thomas tried to investigate further. Cornelius himself stopped him, ordering the entire area off limits, claiming the structure was unsafe. And then, just like that, the official investigation began, and ended almost as quickly. 6 days. That's all the Pittsburgh police gave to one of the city's wealthiest, most prominent missing persons cases. Detective Samuel Crawford, 20 years on the force. A reputation for digging up truths people wanted buried was assigned to the case. But from the very beginning, His work was blocked, twisted, interfered with. He would later write in private notes that something or someone was pulling the strings, keeping the truth out of reach. Crawford was no fool. Tall, sharp-eyed, prematurely gray, the kind of man who didn't take coincidence for an answer. He'd cracked some of Pittsburgh's hardest cases. But the Vandermark disappearance, it was different. It wasn't just a mystery. It was a warning. Doorway into something so big, so dangerous, that even naming it out loud put lives at risk. As he started questioning the household staff, details emerged. Dark, quiet details that never made it into the official reports. Margaret Sullivan confessed that in the weeks before Evangeline vanished, she'd been getting late-night visitors, men well-dressed, educated, powerful. They always arrived after dark, used the service entrance, met with Evangeline in private, and left before sunrise. Every meeting left her more rattled, more afraid. Margaret remembered their eyes, cold, calculating, the kind that don't just see you, they measure you. And then came Thomas Brennan's piece of the puzzle. He told Crawford about the ice. How's an old stone structure carved into the hillside? It hadn't been used for years. The Vandermarks had switched to electric refrigeration, but Thomas had been seeing footprints in the snow. Not once, repeatedly. Always a woman's. Boots, small, delicate. The same style Evangeline owned. Always late at night. Always alone. But sometimes there were other tracks. Heavy boots. A bigger man, approaching from the public road, instead of the mansion. And on those nights, both sets of prints led to the same place, the ice house. Whatever was happening there, Evangeline had been part of it, maybe even the center of it. And what Thomas saw on those cold, secret nights, what Crawford suspected, but could never prove, would change the course of the investigation, and cost more than just careers, because someone had decided this. Story wasn't going to get out, but here we are, telling it anyway. Ever wonder how far the powerful will go to keep their secrets buried? Detective Crawford was about to find out the hard way when he tried to search the old ice house on the Vandermark estate. Cornelius Vandermark himself shut him down, claimed the place was unsafe, needed a structural inspection before anyone could set foot inside. Strange, right? Especially since every building on that property was built like a fortress, including that ice house. Crawford pushed, at least, let him look around the outside. But the lawyers swooped in. Nope, not without a specific warrant, with probable cause spelled out line by line. That was the first sign this wasn't a normal missing persons case. Usually, families beg detectives to search anywhere, everywhere, if it means finding a loved one. But from day one, it felt like someone with real power was pulling strings to keep certain doors literally locked. 3 days later, Crawford came back with the permits, the warrants, everything signed and sealed. But when he got there, the ice house was different, sealed with fresh mortar, locked up like a tomb. Vandermark's lawyers argued that because the structure had been altered, The warrant no longer applied, and the speed of that renovation unreal. Skilled masons, truckloads of materials, all moved and done in hours. Almost like someone knew Crawford was coming back. But the ice house wasn't the only thing that vanished. So did Evangeline's journal, the leather-bound book. Servants had seen her writing in obsessively. It was supposed to be in her locked desk. The desk was untouched. No sign of a break-in, and the only key, she had it when she disappeared. Cornelius swore he knew nothing about any journal, but Margaret Sullivan, a trusted servant, swore under oath she'd seen him reading it the very morning. Evangeline went missing, and this wasn't just a diary full of private thoughts. Servants described it as something else entirely. Page after page of detailed notes, sketches, business letters, a massive, organized record of something. Evangeline had been writing in it every single day for 6 months. So Crawford started digging deeper, not just into Evangeline's disappearance, but her bloodline. Her family, the Hartwells, had been banking, royalty in New England, rich, respected, untouchable, until suddenly they weren't. In less than 5 years, their fortune was gone. Not gradually, violently. Complex financial disasters hit them one after another, like someone was targeting them. And then came the deaths. Harrison Hartwell, Evangeline's father, found dead in his Boston office in 1886. Officially suicide by hanging, but no note, no depression. Friends swore he wasn't the type. The police file was paper-thin, just a bland coroner's note, blaming it on unsound mind. But Crawford, he found whispers of something else. A source in Boston's banking world told him Harrison had been working on exposing a massive steel industry fraud, a scheme involving a powerful group of Pittsburgh industrialists. They were allegedly staging industrial accidents, manipulating steel prices, and buying out competitors for pennies. And Harrison, he might have been about to blow the whole thing open. Then there was Edmund Hartwell, Evangeline's younger brother, a Harvard-trained lawyer, sharp, determined. He was helping his father dig into those shady investments. After Harrison's death, Edmund supposedly left for California to seek his fortune. But nobody could say where he really went. Crawford traced the trail. A man matching Edmund's description bought a train ticket to Chicago. Then, nothing west. Hotel logs in Chicago showed someone going by E. Harrison, staying in different places, paying in cash, never staying more than a few days. Like a man on the run. As Crawford pieced it together, a pattern emerged, a chilling one. The Hartwells weren't the only family crushed like this. Other prominent families, from New England to the mid-Atlantic, all hit with eerily similar financial attacks. Families who either owned steel businesses, had sensitive information, or were poking into industrial safety and labor conditions. Each one destroyed, each one's assets quietly scooped up by the same small circle of Pittsburgh magnates. It wasn't random, it wasn't bad luck, it was a machine, a network, a conspiracy designed to erase threats, silence investigators, and swallow industries whole. And Evangeline Van Mark, She wasn't just another victim. She was the last thread, and someone had cut it. Crawford's private notes reveal it plain. Her disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a decade-long purge, a campaign to protect secrets worth millions, maybe billions, no matter who had to vanish. And here's the question that kept Crawford awake at night. Was Evangeline silenced because she knew too much, or because her journal proved it? How far would the powerful go to build an empire? Murder, sabotage, a trail of bodies no one ever dared connect. Detective Crawford had seen corruption before, but nothing like this. His investigation uncovered whispers of a hidden network, a secret society of industrial titans, carving their way to the top of America's steel industry, not with contracts or competition, but with blood. Dozens of deaths perfectly staged as accidents, suicides, and vanishing acts scattered across cities, buried in separate police files that never touched. Crawford started calling them the Pittsburgh Circle, and, in his notes, a chilling count, at least 37 dead in 10 years. Business rivals, journalists, labor leaders, even family members who'd learned too much, and the methods, cold, calculated, terrifying. Explosions that looked like boiler failures, fires that devoured evidence, suicides that were anything but. Then, 3 months after Evangeline disappeared, Pittsburgh shook, literally. A massive blast ripped through the Consolidated Steelworks, one of Vandermark's biggest rivals. It was 3:17 a.m., 17 workers dead. Half the plant gone. Officially, it was a boiler failure, but rumors spread fast in the steel towns. People whispered sabotage. The blast didn't behave like any normal accident. Investigators quietly admitted it seemed to come from multiple points at once. And even worse, several safety systems had been shut off just hours before. That detail vanished from the official record almost as soon as it surfaced. But a survivor, a night watchman named Patrick O'Connell, saw things no one else did. While helping clear the wreckage, he found a half-burned leather satchel buried under collapsed office walls. Inside, blueprints, floor plans of steel mills across Pittsburgh, notes on weak points, security schedules, perfect timing for accidents, and the handwriting, elegant, feminine. Margaret Sullivan, Evangeline's former servant, confirmed it instantly, bit with Evangeline's hand. Those documents weren't a moment of madness. They were months, maybe years, of meticulous planning, detailed sketches, photos of factory interiors taken in secret, notes on when and where to strike, and in the middle of it all, letters, correspondence between someone signing Evie and another, identified only as urgent, desperate, talking about exposing the circle, bringing justice for father. Crawford compared the handwriting. EV matched Evangeline. EH, a man's hand. Legal, academic, maybe Edmund Hartwell. Suddenly, Evangeline's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a war, one waged in shadows, because the Consolidated Steelworks explosion. It wasn't alone. In the past 18 months, 7 other plants, Steel mills, coal mines, manufacturing hubs had gone up in smoke, crumbled under mysterious accidents. And every single one had something in common. They were competitors, port or soon-to-be acquisitions. Every blast, every fire, every accident hit a company when it was weakest. Mid-labor strikes, drowning in debt, vulnerable to a buyout. And who benefited? The same circle. Always. Crawford followed the threads, cut and found the horrifying truth. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a blueprint. The Pittsburgh Circle wasn't removing rivals one by one. They were rewriting the entire economy of Pennsylvania, controlling steel, coal, manufacturing piece by piece, until nothing moved without their say-so. A conspiracy vast enough to reshape an industry, and ruthless enough to kill anyone who got in the way. And somewhere in the middle of it, Evangeline Vandermark, the woman who might have tried to stop them and paid the ultimate price. What happened to her journal, to the truth she risked everything to write, could still change everything, if it's ever found. Ever wonder what it would look like if a handful of businessmen quietly ran a city, a state, maybe even an entire industry? Detective Crawford didn't have to imagine it. He found it. What he uncovered was nothing short of a shadow government, a hidden council of industrial giants pulling the strings of politicians, judges, police chiefs, and even the editors of the newspapers that told people what to believe. They called themselves nothing. Crawford called them the Pittsburgh Circle, 15 years earlier. They'd started as a simple alliance, just 3 steel producers agreeing to squeeze out smaller rivals. But greed grows fast. Soon, the circle wasn't just steel. It was coal, railroads, banks, big law firms, even lawmakers themselves. And they didn't just compete. They crushed. The circle had mastered the art of invisibility, controlling public opinion, choking investigations, even owning the very papers that reported on the accidents they caused. They had men, former soldiers, detectives, killers for hire, who carried out their orders clean, quiet, and untraceable. Crawford's digging into Evangeline Vandermark's past revealed just how personal this web of power really was. Her father, Harrison Hartwell, had stumbled onto the circle's secrets while following suspicious steel investments for his banking clients in Boston. Before he could blow the whistle, he was murdered, his death staged as suicide. They almost got her brother, Edmund, to a young lawyer digging into the same trail of corruption. But he slipped away before the circle could silence him. And Evangeline, somewhere along the line, she found out what had really happened to her family. And instead of running, she started her own investigation from inside the lion's den. Her marriage to Cornelius Vandermark, one of the circle's founding members, those mysterious late-night visitors to the Vandermark mansion. They weren't random. Crawford now believed they were allies, maybe even Edmund himself. Working with reformist journalists and a few honest cops to gather enough evidence to take the circle down. And then came Crawford's most terrifying discovery yet. property records, land bought quietly through shell companies tied to Vandermark's empire. One address stood out, a secluded farmhouse in Westmoreland County, 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Crawford went there quietly, late April, 1888. What he found looked innocent at first, modest, comfortable, almost peaceful. But the place was built like a fortress. Reinforced doors, heavy shutters, secret passages linking rooms. This wasn't a weekend retreat. It was a safe house. Inside the study, the truth hit like a hammer. Dot maps, charts, newspaper clippings, family trees of Pittsburgh's elite. Play, a web of power and blood literally pinned to the walls. In the center, what Crawford would later describe as a spider of corruption, mapping every industrial accident, every acquisition, every ruined competitor that had fed Vandermark's empire. There were photographs, financial records, letters between circle members openly discussing which rivals would be removed, and how worst of all, covert photographs of secret meetings, showing Cornelius Vandermark and other industrial heavyweights casually planning what could only be described as acts of terror against their own competition. And then the farmhouse gave up one more secret dot in the cellar. Behind a false wall Crawford found by sheer luck was a hidden chamber. Inside, the rot went even deeper. Files on political assassinations, payoffs to judges, reporters eliminated, labor leaders marked for death, and one photograph made Crawford's hands shake. It showed the inside of the Consolidated Steelworks boiler room, with red ink marks highlighting weak points. Notes scribbled in Evangeline's graceful handwriting about where to place charges for maximum effect. Dated November 15, 1887, less than a month before Evangeline disappeared. 4 months before the explosion that killed 17 workers. The meaning was crushing. On paper, it looked like Evangeline herself had helped plan the blast. But when Crawford dug deeper into the hidden files, a far more tragic truth emerged. She had been involved, yes, but not willingly. What came next, what those documents really revealed, would change everything. And keep watching, because what happened next is the part nobody saw coming. What if the only way to save your brother's life was to help the people who killed your father? That's the nightmare Evangeline Vandermark had been living. And nobody knew, hidden in that farmhouse, behind a false wall. Detective Crawford found letters that changed everything. Evangeline hadn't been a willing conspirator at all. She'd been forced into it, threatened, blackmailed. The circle had Edmund. Her missing brother wasn't dead, but he might as well have been. They used his life as a leash, demanding intelligence on rival companies, sabotage plans, anything they wanted, while her marriage to Cornelius gave them the perfect cover. But Evangeline was no victim. While pretending to cooperate, she'd been quietly building a case, documenting every move, every murder, every bribe, piece by dangerous piece. She was preparing to expose the entire Pittsburgh circle. And then Crawford found the real bombshell, tucked inside a hollowed-out, book in the farmhouse library, a string of letters between Evangeline and a man who signed only as E. H. Edmund Hartwell. He was alive, hiding under a new name. Finn working alongside his sister to bring the circle down from the inside. Their letters described a brilliant but desperate plan, expose the conspiracy, protect witnesses, survive long enough to testify. But the final letter, dated December 10th, 1887, just 2 days before Evangeline vanished, froze Crawford's blood. Our father's death was no suicide. C knows we've uncovered the truth about the circle. They plan to eliminate both of us within days. I've hidden copies of all the evidence in multiple locations. If I don't make it, remember our childhood hiding place. The truth waits there. Don't trust anyone in Pittsburgh. The corruption reaches to the highest levels of government. Trust only the contact in Chicago whose name I gave you. Time is running out. V. With it, a map, the Vandermark estate, marked locations, hidden caches, and one mark stood out, the old ice house. Suddenly, everything made sense. Evangeline's frequent, secretive visits weren't conspiratorial meetings. They were cover. She'd been hiding evidence, damning, dangerous proof, piece by piece, right under her husband's nose. As Crawford stepped back and saw the full picture, he understood what Evangeline had really been. A woman trapped in a marriage built on blood and betrayal. Two chose not to run, but to fight. Every day she'd played the perfect wife, while secretly building a weapon that could bring down the most powerful men in Pennsylvania. But that kind of courage doesn't go unnoticed. By the time Crawford prepared to retrieve the ice house files, he felt it, eyes on him, strangers outside his boarding house. His mail opened and resealed. Witnesses who once spoke freely now claimed they remembered nothing. The hunter was becoming the hunted. And then the investigation just stopped. April 1888. Rainy morning. Detective Samuel Crawford found dead in an alley behind Pittsburgh Central Police Station. Official cause: heart attack, brought on by heavy drinking. But Crawford didn't drink. His wife swore he was in perfect health. More telling still, every single file related to Evangeline Vandermark disappeared from the police station that very night. Crawford's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning. The circle would kill lawmen, judges, anyone and the city got the message. After that, Pittsburgh's elite closed ranks. Fear settled over the steel city like smoke from its own mills. Workers whispered about accidents that seemed too convenient to final. Reporters found their stories killed before print. Politicians who once championed labor rights suddenly preached stability. But secrets have a way of leaking, even after his death. Crawford's work kept moving, like embers carried on the wind. He'd shared pieces of his findings with contacts beyond Pittsburgh. Quiet, careful men who read between lines and knew when something smelled rotten. One of them, Boston Police Captain William O'Brien, had never been satisfied with how Harrison Hartwell's suicide had been handled. And this one reeked. The banker found hanging in his office. No note, no motive. The scene closed in days, despite papers scattered and furniture overturned, details written off as panic before the act. But now, with Crawford's clues, O'Brien saw what nobody dared say aloud back then. Harrison Hartwell hadn't taken his own life. He'd been silenced, and the truth, the one Evangeline died trying to reveal, wasn't dead yet. It was waiting. Sometimes the smallest detail, a name left off a police report, a single missing statement, can unravel everything. That's exactly what happened next. A Boston night watchman had once told police he'd seen 3 well-dressed men slipping out of Harrison Hartwell's office the night his suicide was discovered. His words never even entered the official record. Convenient, isn't it? Captain William O'Brien thought so. He started digging, first for Edmund Hartwell, who was supposed to have fled to California, but the trail was ice cold. No arrival records, no sightings, nothing, until something strange surfaced. Whispers from Western lawmen about a sharp young attorney, changing names like jackets, asking dangerous questions about industrial corruption in city after city across the Midwest. Meanwhile, in Chicago, another man's curiosity was catching fire. Michael Flanagan, investigative journalist, Chicago Tribune, famous for pulling back the velvet curtain on the powerful, Flanagan had stumbled onto Detective Crawford's research. Those eerie accidents across Pennsylvania's steel empire, and what he found lined up almost too perfectly. Fires, explosions, bankruptcies that came at exactly the right time for exactly the right people. And it wasn't just Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, different cities, same patterns, steel, shipping, even the brand new automobile industry, all showing signs of the same playbook. Secret meetings, coded letters, sudden deaths, vanishing witnesses. The Pittsburgh Circle, it turned out, wasn't a lone monster. It was one head of a hydra. And then Flanagan got the break Crawford never lived to see. Through a maze of middlemen and coded notes, the journalist made contact with the ghost himself, E.H., Evangeline's missing brother, Edmund Hartwell, alive, hunted, and ready to talk. Their meeting a freezing night on Chicago's South Side, in an empty warehouse with more exits than walls. They checked every shadow twice, and when Edmund finally spoke, what he told Flanagan would change everything. He'd been on the run since Boston, changing identities like gloves, living in fear, but never stopping. The investigation that killed his father and sister, he'd kept it alive. And what he found, terrifying, doesn't even cover it. The Pittsburgh Circle was just one branch. The real network, sprawling, invisible, untouchable, reached into banks, railroads, newspapers, judges, senators, even cabinet members. A shadow government, controlling not just money, but policy, crushing rivals with one hand, steering America's future with the other. They'd engineered financial panics like the crash of 1873 on purpose. They'd triggered strikes and violence, just to justify sending federal troops to crush workers' movements. They'd even bent us foreign policy to protect their empires, no matter the cost to the public. And then Edmund said the words Flanagan dreaded most. Evangeline didn't disappear. She was murdered, not by strangers, by her own husband, Cornelius Vandermark, with other circle members standing by, after she threatened to take what she knew to federal authorities. But even facing death, Evangeline had outplayed them, at least partly. Before they silenced her, she'd hidden everything. Not just names and dates, but blueprints, bank trails, letters, photographs, even phonograph recordings, proof of who they were, what they'd done, and where they were going next. And she hadn't just documented the past. She'd found other victims, people willing to testify. If only they could be kept alive long enough to reach a courtroom. That night in Chicago, Edmund laid it all out. He and Evangeline had planned a synchronized struck. Evidence dropped to newspapers, lawmen, politicians in dozens of cities at the same time. Too much, too fast for the circle to bury. But someone tipped Cornelius off, and on December 12, 1887, instead of a quiet confession, there was blood, a brutal confrontation, a murder, and a systematic destruction of everything they'd risked. Bare lives to build. Edmund's voice broke when he described his sister's last words to him, a final message, sent in desperation, telling him where to look, who to trust, and warning that the very heart of the U.S. government was compromised. The fire, she started, hadn't gone out, and now, in that cold Chicago warehouse, it was Edmund's turn to decide. Keep running, or finish what Evangeline began. Ever get that feeling like history has been hiding something right under our noses? What you're about to hear is one of those stories. A coded telegram, a desperate warning, and a conspiracy so powerful it could decide who lived, who died, and who ruled America's industrial empire. Hours before Evangeline Vandermark's death, her brother Edmund received a message, brief, urgent, and terrifying. Their carefully built plan to expose a secret criminal network had been discovered. The instructions were clear: initiate the emergency plan. But by the time he read it, it was too late. Edmund faced a brutal choice. Risk everything to save his sister and die beside her, or preserve the evidence that might one day take the killers down. He chose the evidence. Not long after, a meeting between Edmund and journalist Michael Flanagan in a dim Chicago warehouse was cut short by the sharp echo of footsteps in the hall, and then the unmistakable click of revolvers being cocked. Both men froze. They'd been found in that split second. Edmund shoved a small leather portfolio into Flanagan's hands, whispering the only thing that mattered. Inside were the locations of Evangeline's hidden evidence and the names of others willing to testify. And then chaos. Gunmen closed in. Edmund and Flanagan ran through dark streets, over fences, ducking into alleys, saved only by a mix of luck, street knowledge, and the quiet help of sympathetic workers who hated the same industrial overlords now hunting them. They escaped, barely, but they knew the truth. They were marked men now, hunted by a machine with limitless money, powerful friends, and no hesitation to kill. That portfolio. It didn't just hold proof of past crimes. It carried maps of future operations, plans that could topple entire regions, crush labor movements, even manipulate the national economy, and the death that had set this nightmare in motion. It began at precisely 11:47 p.m. on December 1887. Cornelius Vandermark walked into his wife's study without knocking, a quiet act that said more than any words. His face, a mask of cold fury. Two men stood behind him, faces Evangeline knew from polite social gatherings. Men she now understood were part of the Pittsburgh Circle, killers wearing the smiles of businessmen. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Cornelius asked, calm but venomous. In his hand, photographs, documents, and the letters. Bet tied her to Edmund, her entire secret world exposed. "You've been clever, my dear," he said, "but not clever enough." Evangeline didn't beg. Chair prepared for this moment, even if facing it was something else entirely. She knew her evidence was safe. She knew her brother would fight on. But that night, her life ended, and her truth, her terrible, powerful truth, was buried with her. For 34 years, Pittsburgh slept under the weight of that silence. The circle grew richer, stronger, quieter. Cornelius became a celebrated titan of industry, a man praised in public while rotting in paranoia behind closed doors. Servants whispered about the new locks, the strange precautions, the empty look in his eyes. He never remarried, publicly mourning the very woman he had killed. Then fate cracked the case. In 1921, long after Cornelius's death, the old Vandermark mansion was being renovated. A carpenter noticed something strange. The library's walls didn't match the building's exterior dimensions. Behind oak paneling, sealed for decades, they found a hidden chamber. Inside, Evangeline's archive, untouched, complete, damning. Photographs, letters, financial ledgers, plans, names, everything she died to protect. And just like that, the ghosts of Pittsburgh's industrial elite stirred once more. If this story has you chilled, share it, because what happens next will change the way you look at power forever. Ever wonder what secrets might be hiding just a few inches behind an old wall? In 1921, during a routine renovation, workers in Pittsburgh made a discovery that would rip open one of the darkest chapters of America's industrial age. They found a room, not just any room, a hidden chamber, 8 by 12 feet, tucked behind the grand library of the Vandermark mansion. Shelves on every wall. A small desk positioned under a clever ventilation system that had kept the air fresh, and the secrets inside perfectly preserved. It wasn't just a storage space. It was a vault, a refuge, and a silent witness to murder. Inside sat more than 200 documents, photographs, letters, each one a blade cutting through decades of lies. The papers revealed a monstrous truth. The accidents that had claimed dozens of lives across Pennsylvania's steel empire weren't accidents at all. They were killings, carefully staged to look like random tragedy, all orchestrated by Cornelius Vandermark and the ruthless cabal known as the Pittsburgh Circle. The files were so detailed, so damning, they could have taken down half of America's industrial royalty, if only they'd been found in time, among the worst of it. Financial records proving the Circle's leaders were betting against their competitors, literally short-selling stocks. Right before those companies mysteriously bend up in flames. Those blood-soaked profits were then funneled back into bribing officials and paying the men who carried out the accidents and the photographs. Shocking, clear, undeniable images of private gatherings at the Vandermark estate. Powerful businessmen, politicians, police, brass, plotting, sabotage, deciding who would live, who would die. There was no spinning this, no plausible deniability. But nothing in that hidden room hit harder than one thing. Evangeline Vandermark's journal, bound in red leather. Every page written in her precise, elegant hand, until the last entry, where the lines trembled with fear. Dated December 12th, 1887. The night she vanished. In those final pages, Evangeline described confronting Cornelius with everything she'd uncovered. She begged him to stop the killings, to make amends, to save what little of his soul was left. But Cornelius's mask came off, and what stared back at her wasn't a husband. It was a predator. He laughed at her plea, told her their marriage had been nothing but a business transaction, a way to destroy her family from the inside, to climb higher, faster, bloodier. Then came the ultimatum: vanish forever, live quietly in exile, accept the murders as the cost of her own survival, or be the next name crossed off their list. But Evangeline wasn't built for surrender. Working secretly with her brother Edmund, who'd been living under an assumed identity in Chicago, she created a desperate plan. She would fake her own death, hide within the mansion's forgotten service tunnels, finish documenting every vile detail of the Circle's crimes. And someday, justice would rise from the ashes. That emerald gown left in the foyer, a distraction, a ghost story planted to keep the truth buried while she worked in the shadows. But Evangeline miscalculated. She thought the mansion's hidden passages were her salvation. She didn't know they were Cornelius's design from the start. Every bolt, every latch, every secret entrance. He already knew them all. The journal's last words cut off mid-sentence. But the story the chamber told was clear. The night Cornelius and his men came for her, Evangeline scrambled to seal away her evidence in the hidden library vault, praying she could hide, wait out the danger, escape later. She never made it. About that chamber, built as her last hope, became her tomb. And there it sat, untouched, undisturbed, waiting for 34 silent years. Until a hammer against oak paneling cracked history wide open and gave Evangeline Vandermark's truth, the voice it had been denied for decades. Sometimes, when the past is finally unearthed, it doesn't whisper. It screams. In 1921, during the renovation of an aging Pittsburgh mansion, workers stumbled upon more than just a hidden room filled with papers. In a dark corner, beneath rotting curtains and collapsed shelving, lay bones, human bones, draped in the tattered remains of an emerald silk gown. The jewelry on the skeleton matched descriptions from decades earlier, and inside a delicate locket they found a photograph of banker Harrison Hartwell with a simple inscription, "To my beloved daughter, Evangeline, may you always fight for justice, no matter the cost. Father, 1882. It was her." After 34 years of silence, the truth surfaced. Evangeline Vandermark hadn't vanished. She'd been murdered. The medical examiner, working with what little remained, determined that the woman had died from a brutal blow to the head. Defensive wounds on the arm bones painted a chilling picture. She had fought back. But what shook investigators most wasn't just how she died. It was how she was left. The evidence suggested Evangeline had been sealed alive inside that chamber. The scratches on the walls, desperate claw marks, broken pottery fragments, tools she'd tried to dig through the mortar with. Can you imagine? Trapped, buried in darkness, surrounded by the evidence that could have destroyed her killers, while slowly running out of time. But even in those final, unbearable hours, she fought for justice, carved into the wooden floor, with what investigators believe was a shard of her own jewelry, were her last words. "Edmund," the circle continues, "stop them. Justice for father." E.V., 1887. That one final plea reignited a fire that had been smothered for decades. The discovery of her body, and the mountain of evidence she'd died protecting, triggered a federal investigation that finally pulled the curtain back on the Pittsburgh Circle. This wasn't a job for local law enforcement. Too many were already compromised. Instead, Attorney General Harry Doherty brought in federal agents. What they uncovered shocked the nation. The files named names, powerful names, prominent families, politicians, judges, industrial magnates, all implicated in decades of calculated murder, fraud, and sabotage. The Pittsburgh Circle hadn't just controlled Pennsylvania's steel empire. They'd shaped the entire nation's industrial future through blood, bribery, and fear. At least 93 deaths were tied to them. 93 business rivals, labor organizers, honest cops, investigative journalists, even family members who knew too much. Each death disguised as an accident, a fire, a suicide, a sudden illness, a random mugging gone wrong. And it didn't stop in Pennsylvania. Federal agents uncovered connections stretching across America, other cities, other industries, the same methods. A hidden web of power that had quietly manipulated everything from labor strikes to trade policy. All while the public believed in progress and innovation. Then came the name that tied it all together. Edmund Hartwell, now living under a new identity. Edward Harrison, in Los Angeles. Edmund confirmed what the documents suggested. He and Evangeline had worked with a small, scattered group of reformist journalists and honest cops, fighting an enemy too powerful to confront directly. One by one, their allies vanished. One by one, they were silenced, until it was just the two of them. Evangeline knew that night was a trap, Edmund told investigators, his voice breaking even after 30 years. But she believed her evidence would outlive her, that justice would come, even if it took decades. His testimony filled in the missing pieces, locations of other hidden caches, names of victims, patterns of sabotage, everything federal agents needed to pull the network apart. He'd survived only by disappearing, giving up his career, his name, his home, building a new life while carrying the unbearable weight of his sister's sacrifice. The investigation also confirmed the fate of Detective Samuel Crawford, the man who'd first started unraveling the conspiracy in 1888. He hadn't died of natural causes, as the records claimed. He'd been poisoned, a heart failure mimic that left no obvious trace. But his case files were destroyed to bury what he'd found for decades. The Pittsburgh Circle had buried its sins under steel, smoke, and silence. But in the end, the truth clawed its way out, brick by brick, bone by bone, name by name, and it all started with one brave woman, a sister, a daughter, a wife who refused to let murder hide behind industry. What if I told you the truth about Evangeline Vandermark didn't end with her hidden chamber? It went further, deeper, straight into the halls of power. When investigators dug into the death of Detective Samuel Crawford, they uncovered something extraordinary, hidden away by his widow at great personal risk, were Crawford's own notes. Notes that laid out in careful detail just how close he had been to exposing the Pittsburgh Circle before they silenced him. And that wasn't all. As the federal investigation widened, names started spilling out, not just local steel barons, poor, corrupt police chiefs, but senators, congressmen, federal judges. Some were active players in the conspiracy. Others were simply paid to look away. Either way, the fallout was explosive. What followed became the largest corruption probe in American history at the time. Dozens of powerful men stepped down, or were forced out as the truth crawled into daylight. But history doesn't always honor its martyrs. In 1923, the Vandermark mansion was demolished. The official story structural decay, the whispered truth. Someone wanted the last traces of those crimes erased. In its place grew a quiet little park, with a modest memorial to victims of industrial violence. No mention of Evangeline. No mention of the Pittsburgh Circle. Meanwhile, Cornelius Vandermark's empire didn't just vanish. It dissolved into shadows, broken up into shell companies, hidden in trusts, cleaned and repurposed. The same families who had once ordered killings and covered up crimes kept their fortunes, their power, and eventually even their public reputations, polished by charity, political influence, and time. But their dark origin stories bury. Yet, even in that darkness, something changed. The steel industry, once a machine that chewed through human lives for profit, was forced to reform. New, safety laws, legal protections for unions, oversight that made the old kind of bias harder to hide. It came too late for the hundreds already dead, but it saved thousands who came after. The exposure of the Pittsburgh Circle reshaped more than steel. It changed law enforcement. It changed journalism. Federal agents got new authority to tackle interstate conspiracies. Reporters learned new ways to protect their sources and dig into corporate crime. The case became a legend among investigative journalists, proof of how persistence could break even the most carefully built walls of silence, and also a warning of how dangerous that fight could be. And Evangeline's sacrifice, it didn't die with her her hidden records, armed labor, groups with proof of corporate violence, pushing through life-saving safety laws across Pennsylvania and beyond. They inspired reformers, investigative writers, even young prosecutors who'd grown up believing industry was untouchable, until one woman's secret archive proved otherwise. Her courage, risking everything, knowing death was waiting, became a symbol of the price of truth. Evangeline's story also revealed something personal. It showed how greed and power can poison even the most intimate bonds, how marriage, instead of being love and loyalty, can be weaponized into control. And yet, she used that dangerous access not for comfort or wealth, but to fight, to expose, to bring down giants. She stepped into the fire willingly, and though she disappeared into that winter night in 1887, her determination didn't vanish with her. It lived on, outlasting her killers, shaking the foundations of an empire built on blood and steel, and shaping laws that still protect lives today, all from one act of impossible courage. Sometimes, progress doesn't come from powerful men in polished offices. It comes from ordinary people willing to risk everything, reputation, wealth, even life itself, to tear the mask off corruption. Evangeline Vandermark was one of those people. Her voice, stolen in violence, spoke again, decades later, through bones, through papers, through the quiet scratching of her final plea carved into wood. And it asked one haunting question that still echoes today. If such a conspiracy could thrive in the heart of America's industrial age, what might be hiding now? Could something just as deadly, just as invisible, already be operating in boardrooms and governments today, using technology, markets, and silence as weapons? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the Pittsburgh Circle's secrets are fully known, or do shadows still hold pieces of the truth? And if this story sent a chill down your spine, share it with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on that bell, because there are more stories buried in America's past, and some of them are far darker than anyone ever imagined.